I have started the recording of this meeting from today onwards. So this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be uploaded at the prescribed path. So yeah, in terms of agenda, I don't have a lot on the agenda today. Last two meetings, we actually focused the discussion around the V2 API, which also led to some discussions about the use cases which did not limit themselves to federation alone. Probably some use cases also span the overall multi-cluster scenarios. So we can continue on the same lines. There are one or two items which I just wanted to point out and maybe take a consensus or opinion from people attending this sync, which I can start off with. If any of you have some specific item to talk about in today's agenda, we can probably list it out right now. And just to confirm, I am audible, right? I should get some yes or no.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we were discussing, like I and Shashi were discussing, and then one of the points came up about the environments which are important to, for example, Red Hat or anybody else who might be the consumer of this right now, where they might intend to see the support of federation. So for us, for Huawei, it is Huawei's cloud, so which is sort of an on-prem version of K8s. And some features like ingress in federation are currently supported on GC alone. So we also would need to ensure that such features we can probably either save that are not supported, or we'll have to find a solution for that. Might not be necessarily a very high priority as of now.
Can we clarify what federation means in this instance? Is it the current
current
RCP?
solution? Current solution, and current solution when it modifies or evolves into the Federation V2 API also. If we sort of think about it, then V2 also would at least have an active control plane and deployment mechanism, or whatever features are running in it might not be very different from what it is right now.
I don't think being prescriptive helps us at this juncture, at least with regards to the V2 API. I think certainly my goal, and I think Red Hat's goal, is making sure that a V2 solution is modular and can be deployed in different configurations depending on the use case, which would mean that maybe some people would want an active control plane that was dynamically making scheduling decisions, and that would seem to be Huawei's use case at least. We've also had other customers that, at least initially, want something that's predictable and is going to propagate to clusters, kind of like a templating mechanism, basically. And I've been thinking about how to get around some complaints about the federation control plane in the past have been that it's kind of a central point of failure. And I fully realize that that's, people might leverage that at Cube as well. And your workloads keep running is always the refrain. But for people who have security concerns or concerns about having this one control plane that can go down, having a pull model like that actually, I guess with the model that I've been thinking about is you would have the Federation API V2, and you would define how you wanted your resources to be propagated, etc. And then you would have a controller that just generated a configuration for something like KubeApplier, and that configuration was then pulled into the clusters rather than pushed.
Okay.
And so I'm getting a bit into the weeds, but my point is that being prescriptive I don't think is helpful, because there's many different ways that this thing can be deployed. And I would hope that we could rally around the API as kind of a central way to define what you want to do, and then you could have different, like kind of different configurations, controllers, etc., that would provide the characteristics that a particular user desired. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. So, in short, the answer to that original question, which I did list out here, is that we ideally might not need to think about this as of now.
Yeah, I think once we have an API that at least is sort of the base, the common element for all of this stuff, then interested parties can start working on solutions that suit their use cases, hopefully not stepping on one another, duplicating work, but also not compromising what they need in favor of what somebody else needs. I know, I just want my cake and I want to be able to eat it too. We'll see.
Yeah, I think, Maru, it would be useful if you could perhaps document the requirements and plans you have, because a pattern that I've seen developing is that people come up with a proposal and then you come up with a bunch of reasons why it doesn't fit with your plans that have not necessarily been clearly expressed before. So I think if there is such a plan, it would be good to put it on paper, and then people could use it as a input into any proposals they put forward and take it into account, as opposed to put forward proposals without necessarily understanding what's in your head and then have you shoot them down for reasons that the proposer could not have been aware of before putting the proposal together.
Well, I mean, I should say that I'm not intending to, like, the goal here is having enough separation of concern that people can, you know, if somebody wants to do something new that nobody else is doing, they can do it without having to worry about whether it's going to be supportable or whether it's going to be interfering or conflicting with what somebody else is wanting to do. Like the example of a push versus pull model, I just want an API that, you know, will allow people to define things in a, you know, with authorization and hierarchical namespacing. And then if somebody wants to implement, you know, a pull controller that uses that, they can do that. If somebody wants to re-implement, like, you know, the Federation control plane's push model, they can do that. So in my mind, it's not a matter of enumerating all the possible use cases. It's a matter of providing sufficient separation of concern that people don't have to worry about, you know, whether it's going to fit with existing things. They can do something new, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it doesn't integrate, it doesn't integrate. But it's not a matter is, you know, are we on this common path that we have to all be on the same? I don't know that that was workable as a way to do things.
Yeah, I guess my concern is that there are people who have code and have written code and are wanting to write more code. And I think they should be encouraged to write code, even if it doesn't fulfill all the unspecified or undocumented requirements of all parties. And those parties can certainly come back and take that code and refactor it, or you know, those kind of things, or reuse it in ways that it was perhaps not originally intended for. It feels like we're getting in a bit of we repeatedly get in a kind of a deadlock situation where no proposal can be approved because it doesn't fulfill a bunch of unspecified requirements. I'm
just saying that the world to me is changing a little bit, and we are making progress, like on the API side. Just a matter of keeping things separate enough that if you want something, you add something to support that, rather than, oh, I have to actually integrate it super tightly and it might interfere with what other people are doing. Like, I guess my headspace is maybe a little bit different than yours.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is it would be useful to come up with concrete examples of that and design some specific things so that people can start writing code. As opposed to
we're working on that. Like, we have something. We have basically a proposal that fleshes out this kind of decomposition of the API, and it's not quite ready to show because we don't really. There's some sort of, especially around integration with the cluster registry, there's a few gotchas that we don't really want to impose in the community without having thought about it. And not impose, but like to deliver something where it's like there's too many unanswered questions, but we are hoping to have something to show next week that can basically demonstrate what I'm talking about.
Sorry, I joined a little late. I missed the first part of this discussion. I want to be sure that we're not blocking anybody or nobody feels blocked. Like what specifically is the context?
Irfan was just asking about what kind of environment, deployment scenario, et cetera, we were anticipating supporting both for V1 and going forward for V2. And I guess I was of the opinion that we don't really want to worry too much about that. Like, because I'm kind of focusing on like the foundational, like, I've been thinking about kind of like the database schema. You kind of got to define the common data structures, like anyway, maybe that's a bad analogy in this example, and Quentin was concerned that not enumerating what we plan to do, or what we wanted to do would be blocking other people. And I'm just trying to allay his concerns. I'm not sure if I was successful in that regard.
I think my point was actually slightly different than that, was that if you have future plans and you want them incorporated into contributions that are happening today, we should try and write those future plans down and have them explicitly addressed in any kind of proposals that the rest of the community comes up with, as opposed to an alternative model, which is that your future plans are, and this is not pointed at you, this is a general observation, somebody's future plans are not very well specified and certainly not written down or shared clearly with the community. And then every proposal that comes forward from the community does not fit in with these sometimes ill-defined and unshared future plans, and then the community can't move forward. So that's the sort of failure mode, blockage mode that I want us to try and avoid. And as I kind of alluded to, there are two solutions. One is explicitly share the future plans, and then we can explicitly accommodate, or try and accommodate them at least, or don't block the current development and code contributions, design contributions, until such time as your future plans are fleshed out and shared, and then refactor the code or do whatever needs to be done to accommodate your future plans with as little waste of effort as possible. But I don't think to be able to align numerous unspecified future plans unless they're we have a
I don't think anybody's trying to, like, I think we've tried to be explicit that we're not trying to block any contribution. Anybody can do whatever they want, Certainly there's no reason to say, oh, you can't do that because we have this new API that's going to be doing things differently. We don't know what that's looking like. So we're working on fleshing that out, but in the meantime, there's no restriction. We're not trying to block anything. Okay, good.
Yeah, actually this next pointer, which I have highlighted right now, this I did put explicitly over here to maybe get some pointers about what, for example, Red Hat is doing and can be listed out over here. Maybe but a simple pointer might be okay. And or there might be any suggestions with respect to the current or ongoing work which probably we have missed out, which I have missed out in listing out in this backlog, that can be suggested or put out over there.
I'm sorry, I'm not. I heard two different things. One of them was the second one was, sounds like there's a desire to make sure that we understand ongoing work that's happening right now on Kubernetes Federation repo, right? Okay, I did not understand what the first one was.
The first one is that if any other work which falls in context of federation, not necessarily Kubernetes Federation repo, then maybe it'll serve community a good purpose if it's listed down over there also. Or maybe it's already listed down. I'm not sure because I already listed one item as ongoing work on new Federation API.
I see. Okay, so I think I feel like there's some degree of impedance mismatch that, like, I will, at the risk of putting my foot in my mouth, I will just go ahead and try to speak plainly. And the sense that I'm getting is that, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe there's a concern that, like, there's work happening at Red Hat that we're going to try to drop on this community and say it's got to be this way. And if that's the case, I want to.
I'm just going to cut you short, Paul, because I think you're probably responding to what I said. That was not a concern at all.
Okay.
A concern that was more that, you know, when we go through these items, for example, or any work items that are proposed to be done today or tomorrow or next week, that they may not line up with the work that's happening at Red Hat, which has not been shared with the community yet, and we should not block them on that basis. And Maru has assured me that that will not happen, so I think that's resolved. There is absolutely no concern that Red Hat is doing covert work and not sharing with people or anything like that. The concern was more that if that work needs to be accommodated in the future plans, it needs to be explicitly expressed, preferably in writing. And I think one of the ways it can be accommodated in the future is to take whatever code we build today and tomorrow and next week and refactor it and reuse it accordingly in whatever future plans might come out from Red Hat or anyone else in the future, which may not look like Federation today. For example, pull versus push and all of these things. You know, off the top of my head, I can think of very easy ways to reuse whatever we might build today based explicitly on a push model for a pull model. I mean, it's not a huge gap between the two. But we don't need to go into that discussion. So that was the main point, not any accusations of covert work happening at Red Hat, just to be clear.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, where it makes sense, we're definitely going to reuse stuff. The best code is the stuff we don't have to write. So,
yeah.
Okay. Let's move ahead then. Yeah, there is one point in discussion with Shashi that came up, and that I think it makes sense that we share with the Federation work group at least. I think it also makes a point to share this in that multi-cluster community probably next week. Shashi, you want to talk about this? So there was you can go ahead and talk about this.
Okay, yeah. This is related to the existing Federation code and the deployment mechanism or the CI jobs which we had. So which relies on deploying multiple clusters. So initially we were doing that using KubeApp. I think everybody might be aware, like that's going to go mostly in this quarter. So the alternate mechanism which was used by the cluster lifecycle folks was based on Kubernetes Anywhere, but that is a kind of a middle step. I think that has been abandoned also in favor of cluster APIs and the tools based on cluster API. So I think right now that also is in a process of integration or maybe maturing. The tools, I think Robert Bailey gave a demo in the KubeCon, but it is still in a proof of concept. I think there's not a solid tool yet for deploying the clusters. So that will take some time to get into the test infra for deploying the clusters. And above that, we also need to do maybe little more work to deploy multiple clusters within test infra. So I'm not sure, like, okay, is there any other alternatives or suggestions for this particular work? We continue to keep on monitoring that, and then maybe also volunteer to do that particular work in test infra, basically. So I think this is coming as an urgent thing if you want to maintain a CI jobs. Otherwise, maybe little development will be affected in Federation, I believe.
So the idea is that you're actually going to move support from Kubernetes anywhere, or is it just going to be another option?
Actually, yeah, Kubernetes Anywhere is having some more issues. So I think they are not going to continue further in that line. Most probably, most of the folks are focusing on cluster API right now. Okay, but
Right.
the existing CI jobs are still using Kubernetes Anywhere, which works for their scenario. The previously, when I attempted to introduce multiple cluster deployment using Kubernetes Anywhere, in Federation we happened to like we needed a cloud provider support in the clusters. That was not possible in
Right.
the previous one, so that was stalled at that time.
So this
Okay.
is going to be primarily for CI. I mean,
Yes.
I guess I'm just wondering if
Yeah,
like
purely.
the cluster API is kind of a I'm assuming based on what little exposure I've had that it's kind of a cloud agnostic API for provisioning.
Right.
And my question would be like, can we rely on that? I mean, maybe Kubernetes anywhere is kind of the same. I was just concerned like this doesn't preclude doing local deployment, does it? Or do we have other mechanisms planned for that?
Yeah, I think there has been some tools like POC kind of a tools which uses cluster API and deploys on GCP. So our current CI environment is totally on GCP. Okay.
Can I ask a question and communicate my ignorance on the subject of what Kubernetes Anywhere is?
Kubernetes Anywhere is a tool maybe to deploy the VMs and bring up the Kubernetes cluster based on KubeADM. Okay, it uses Terraform to deploy and kconfig kind of a configurations for accepting user configuration and deploy the cluster.
Gotcha. Okay. So this sounds like there's the touch point with the cluster lifecycle working group, right? Is that the
Yes,
cluster
yes,
management API? Okay. Got it.
Right.
All right. Thanks a lot. Sorry.
Okay. I think, yeah, in the long run, we are supposed to do it. Like we need to deploy multiple clusters above the cluster API. Yeah, I was just curious enough, like, okay, is there any other way we can adopt right now? Maybe.
Shashi, I would recommend. I'm personally a little frustrated that we've been through so many different ways of trying to build clusters, trying to keep up with the, tool of the day, and it seems before the tool of the day is actually stable and usable, they abandon it for a new tool of the day, which is not yet ready. And I'm just being blunt. I would personally recommend that we just, this is such a small part of what we do as a group. I would strongly recommend that we just wait until they have a stable solution that, it sounds like Kubernetes Anywhere is in its user requirements and implementation description is what we need, for i.e. it deploys using standard tools across multiple clouds. But it sounds like it just doesn't work, if I'm paraphrasing what you said. And they're not going to make it work. They're going to start a new thing called something else, which they're going to make work, but which doesn't yet work.
Right.
So I would just, as far as we can, just wait until there is something that both works and is supported and will be supported into the future, and use that when it comes along. And until then, just basically make do with what we have. Is that feasible?
Yeah, that is feasible. Yeah, I was just alarmed by the announcement like GCP Kube app will be gone in this cycle.
Cube Up will be.
Yeah, kubeup.sh. That is the current mechanism we use for deploying the clusters.
Oh, I thought we did Kubernetes. Okay, so kubeup has been in the process of being deprecated for a very long time. That was the bash scripts, basically, right?
Right.
So I'll add a little to this. So to clarify that, the Federation CI still uses kubeup to bring up the clusters. And there are open PRs which Shashi did, maybe some of them are integrated also, did raise to
This
move this
anywhere
mechanism.
was not able to support the cloud providers.
Correct. So because of that, these our Federation CI jobs are not necessarily working on Kubernetes anywhere. And there has been some active work which Shashi initiated, and some of the test infra guys also supported him to let Kubernetes Anywhere support cloud providers, some mechanism where a hook could be provided where it can support cloud providers, so that some necessary stuff, for example, load balancer provisioning can happen in that mechanism. But that work didn't finish. That is still open. So we are sort of in a transition. We are not completely into Kubernetes Anywhere, or we are not completely without it also. And the Federation CI jobs use the older mechanism, which is kubeup. Maybe I should write that also.
Okay, so it sounds like we need to get off kubeup, because that's been in the process of being deprecated for a long time, and that's why we initiated the Kubernetes Anywhere effort, as far as I recall. So it sounds like we just need to do the best we can with the Kubernetes Anywhere effort.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're halfway there, and we just need to finish it. Well, I won't say halfway, some of the way there. As opposed to abandon it and move to a, whatever it is, cluster API, which doesn't work yet.
Yeah, so the bottleneck over there is that whatever work currently that we submit on Kubernetes Anywhere, it doesn't get much attention because the community as such is sort of moving away from it. So you understand what I...
And I guess we just need to fork it. We need to do something. Anyway, okay. Maybe we should have a separate discussion about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ensure that this the people involved in this federation, at least, are aware of this.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing it up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we are halfway through the meeting. We can now continue our discussion, whatever we started last two meetings, about the V2 API, if we want to call it V2 API. I can start with some information which I thought might be relevant. That is one pointer that we have been talking about in earlier two meetings is how exactly the API should look, and how exactly the API mechanism or the machinery should be. And there were some references to usage of some prescribed mechanism like API server builder. So looking at that, I might not have completely understood it. So pardon me if I am wrong somewhere and correct me. What I understood is that that API server builder and whatever ongoing work around the API and moving a lot of that portion of code into staging repos and moving into different repos so that other people or other similar projects can consume the same, is to ensure that there is some framework or some mechanism specified where any project which wants to use the Kubernetes-like API or create a Kubernetes-like API server, it becomes easy for them. And to me, it appears like one way of doing or a different, more organized way of doing what we are doing today as of now in the Federation control plane. So the Federation API server is just a variant of Kubernetes API server, that is correct. And the example of that API server builder also would do the same thing. So the API types or API objects that we expose through that would be pretty similar to what currently the Federation API server is doing. So one point of work or one way of moving to a more organized stuff might be that whatever we have today, we can migrate as is, where the Federation API server still exposes whatever we can call it V1 of Federation API, exposes the same types and all those supported objects which are currently supported, and start using one of the suggested or prescribed mechanism, for example, API server builder. So does this make sense so far, or have I erred somewhere? I can be corrected if I have. And yeah, the next step might be that, sorry, let me just add one more point. Next step might be what we actually have been discussing, not in the last two meetings, some other similar meetings, but I don't remember exactly when, that we also are looking at modularizing the same, so that the users of Federation who want to probably use only one type should be able to use only one type and should not be carrying the burden of rest of the types exposed by the active control plane. So the next step could be, so first step could be we migrate to a prescribed mechanism like this, and next step could be that we some way modularize whatever currently that V1 is exposing. And the third step could be that we migrate from here in some fashion or some mechanism where we don't break away from this and maybe have a V2, so that V1 and V2 both can coexist. They might be different API servers aggregated together, or they might be in the same API server, what we are talking about. And this so far is talking about only the spec of the API and exposing that. The controllers and control plane, the other portion of the control plane is set aside as of now. Yeah, Paul, I think you started to say something.
Oh no, that's okay. So yeah, Irfan, as far as like API server builder goes, like I think it. Let me share my own understanding, and I think we're saying the same thing, but I don't want to like put words in your mouth. The API server builder is a toolkit that will help you plunk out a new empty API server and a new API group and API resources. And it seems to be very, very useful for bootstrapping new things. It definitely has promise as like in another dimension unrelated specifically to like Federation. It seems like it has a lot of promise to ease making new APIs. I wouldn't say it's like a total solution yet in the sense that like once you plunk out an API, it seems like when you go to change it, there's like you have to start doing some of the work of like understanding the guts and internals of an API server. But I think what you better find is that it seems like it's really good for plunking out new stuff, basically, right? Yeah, I'm on the same page with you.
So that's sorry, just to interrupt for a moment. So that sounds like it's kind of one way. I mean, the terminology that was used a long time ago is like these one-way case tools versus round-trip case tools. So you can basically stamp out one of these things, but then the ongoing maintenance, you don't get as much support from the toolkit, right?
Yeah, that's my impression, Quentin.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's the classic problem with these things. And so, yeah, if you've already got something, that it doesn't really make too much sense to use them.
Yeah, now with that said, my own prior experience building API servers has been such that when I actually took a few moments to finally look at this project in the last week, I was extremely happy, and I felt very much that I owed Phil Whitrock a beer for making this thing, because the day one experience in other areas building new API servers has not been easy. And with API Server Builder, you can get to that point that it's taken in other contexts like weeks of time to get to very, very easily in just a few minutes. So with that said, it also seems like, and I haven't done like an exhaustive look at this, but it seemed to me that there might be some there may be some way to use this even if you had an existing API server and you wanted to add a new API group to it, which would be very, very useful. Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah.
Okay.
To just add a couple things to that, I think one of the niceties is that it actually encapsulates things like code generation, so that a project that was depending on API Server Builder would not have to have the build infrastructure that we've inherited from Kubernetes, and that each API server project has had to construct on its own. And also going forward, I see the potential for API Server Builder to be kind of a hook into common testing infrastructure. So rather, we've inherited testing infrastructure from KK today in the Federation repo. Going forward, I would anticipate that there is common infrastructure that is integrated with the project via API Server Builder, so that you don't have to maintain it or have to worry about re-vendoring it. It just kind of comes. It's kind of an interesting amalgam of like library and tooling. I'm not saying it's there yet, but to me, it definitely has promise for the path we're charting.
Yeah, my observation of our reliance on other tools from other teams is that it's been a bit of a mixed bag of success and failure, and these things are often deprecated and or not supported, and if we do need to fix bugs, we sometimes struggle to get them merged. I would say let's keep this on our, let's keep an eye on this thing radar, and perhaps once a quarter try it out and see if there's any obvious value, but perhaps just push on without it right now. And people can use pieces of it as they see fit, but we don't kind of bet the farm on this thing working the way we intend and progressing into the future until it actually does that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And let me point this out again, that the important point that I'm trying to put to this work group is that I am willing to, or I'm trying to chart some evolution plan kind of a thing. For example, today, if you call it the V1 Federation API, that we sort of try to and continue evolve or support, and there possibly is some transition by using some similar mechanism or similar place or similar code, or it could be anything, so that we have at least some idea of how we ideally transition to that V2, whatever we are calling V2, which probably is not very well defined as of now. So some thoughts on that might be very helpful for me to think clearly. Does that make sense, what I am trying to say? Or
Sorry, I had some distractions on my screen over here, and I'm not sure I caught all of what you said, Irfan.
yeah, what I was trying to say is that this whatever I mentioned, that was just a suggestion, like whatever early understanding that I have about the new API and the mechanism to create new API server and all that stuff. What I am more concerned is about some common consensus and plan about current API, which maybe we can call V1, and its evolution to V2, whatever Federation V2 might look like or might become. So the evolution, I would want that to be at least some idea should be in place, which can chalk out, okay, this is the mechanism, or this is the way we ideally would possibly be evolving into V2.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So I think that sorry, I need to mute a couple applications. My bad.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense to me. And like as we've been talking through this meeting, my I wonder if folks would have some interest before 1 week from now in talking specifics about some, like, I guess, sorry, I have a bad habit of being long-winded. Let me try to short circuit that and say, should we have a discussion, and maybe it doesn't need to take, maybe we don't need to wait until the next Federation working group meeting next week. If folks would like to have like a community meeting later this week, to have some time devoted just to talking about what we think the API patterns are. Like, we've already had a lot of these discussions, but I think it might be good to carve out some specific time to devote specifically just to that conversation. Or we could say, if people are very scheduled in the beginning of the week, like I personally am, and maybe don't have time in the rest of this week, maybe we can make the next Federation working group focused on API patterns. Does that sound useful to folks?
It does sound useful to me. I think we can dedicate the next one for talking about these API patterns and their evolution or whatever it is. Hello, others? Hello.